It's an emotional moment for Germans.
On Altos, the Australian hackers had a reputation as being among the best and the brightest. One reason this was true is because one of the Australian hackers, Force, had a program that was very valuable called DEFCON.
DEFCON was designed to scan computer networks for addresses of computers on that network with modems attached.
Force was at home alone one night running his famous DEFCON program, and suddenly it connected to a system, and he began receiving thousands of credit card numbers being dumped to his machine. When Force went through this giant data dump, he found in the last section some unusual credit card transactions. Some of them were for buying expensive cars, or eating out at restaurants, or even visiting brothels. And in fact, one of the people had a credit limit of $5 million.
When Force checked the origin of the list, he found it came from one of the world's largest banks, Citibank.
Force had a somewhat paternalistic attitude to other hackers in the computer underground in Melbourne, but his favorite protege was Phoenix, and he gave to Phoenix some of the credit card numbers from the Citibank machine. Not long after, Phoenix began breaking into other machines in the Citibank network.
There was enough money involved for Citibank to get very edgy, very jumpy. There was enough money involved for them to contact the Secret Service and also the FBI.
Most people back in 1988 were not stealing it to sell it. They were stealing it merely to prove that they could get to sensitive information. And the only way to get to the bottom of those things, because a lot of them were international and not U.S. based, and a lot of them came out of Australia, was that you had to have a great working relationship with the Australian Federal Police.
At that particular time, there was no law in Australia directly relating to computer crime. There was really very little the Federal Police could do other than take it on board as an intelligence probe to try and find out the facts and report to government that perhaps there was a problem with lack of legislation.
The original file that came in complaining about this was made up, and because we didn't have the people, we didn't have the expertise, we didn't have the knowledge, it was left and forgotten about.
In the Northern Hemisphere, the West German police made headway in their own case when they arrested Pengo and his fellow hackers. Pengo gave full details of the hacking ring's activities in the hope of gaining immunity from prosecution.
The German case made the Australian hackers very worried. It created a paranoia that they were next on the list. The Australians were made even more paranoid by the fact that one of the ringleaders of the German group, Hagbard, was found burned to death. His petrol-doused, charred remains were found in a forest in Germany. In January, 2 articles appeared in the Australian newspaper, one of them claiming that Australian hackers had stolen $500,000 from Citibank. There were particular hackers named in these articles, including Electron and Phoenix. The Victorian police investigated the allegations and found them to be untrue.
The articles that were published in the Australian indicated that there were a certain number of informants. It scared me for a couple of weeks, but then the fear versus the need to find the modem and start again won out. So I was back into it again pretty quickly.
We probably had about 100 cases going over a 2 to 3 year period. And I'm not sure why. You can't explain why hackers were more prevalent attacking U.S. systems, but at that particular point in time, they were.
The situation, Madam Speaker, is quite clear.
Responding to increased pressure from US authorities, the Australian government enacted the first federal computer crime laws. The legislation specified stiff penalties, ranging from hefty fines to 10 years imprisonment. The Australian Federal Police now had the authority to act.
When the legislation came through, I was asked to set up a computer crime unit using the existing people within the physical computer area and then bringing in other people who were investigators.
The AFP had a very low computer literacy at that point in time. We're talking about people still using typewriters. It was still the carbon paper days. And so the unknown element of what computers were resulted in a very low opinion of people. They say, well, I don't use computers. It's not important.
Most of the other colleagues, most of the other people at my level thought it was a bit of a wank, and that I should be out there investigating real crime. Initially, we had to borrow computers. We borrowed computers from banks, computers they didn't need, older ones. We had to borrow quite a bit of equipment from anybody we could speak nicely to at the time. From the investigator's point of view, it was a very steep learning curve. Most of us had computers, our own computer, but we would not have known what would happen if we lifted up the bonnet and had a look inside.
Okay, so what we've got here is a main cord going in. Make sure you remember.
It's very difficult, just trying to work out what all these brand new terms were. I had a difficulty early in the piece of just understanding what is now, I suppose, the internet. How did it work? Who paid for it? Why could you get over to the United States and it wouldn't cost you a penny?
The new legislation sent shockwaves through the underground community. While many chose to lay low, one unknown hacker was about to focus the international spotlight on hacking. NASA was 2 days away from launching the space shuttle which carried the Galileo space probe. Galileo had been dogged by controversy from the very beginning because it was to be powered by plutonium.
There was some concern that if the shuttle were to blow up, and this was the first shuttle flight after the Challenger, these plutonium power cells would rupture and that there would be a huge plutonium release into the state of Florida. So at that time, there was a protest going on around the launch, and it was effectively, I think, the morning of that launch that this worm hit.
NASA's computers had been attacked by a worm, a sophisticated form of computer virus.
Can I speak to Ron Tancadi, please?
The worm would change the system logon banner, so when the user would type in their password, up would pop this banner that would fill the screen, and it says, your computer has been wanked, you talk of times of peace and then prepare for war, and this logo that said, Worms Against Nuclear Killers, W-A-N-K.
Panic. Just simple panic. What happened initially was that there were a lot of